Hello. Road to GH will reveal despite Jason's heartfelt and urgent warnings, Carly chose to ignore every sign, every red flag, and every instinct that once helped her survive a lifetime of chaos. She turned away from the one person who had stood by her time and again, choosing instead to lose herself in a relationship with Brennan, a choice she would one day admit was the greatest mistake of her life. Jason, weary but unwavering, said just 7 words before walking away, "You'll regret keeping Brennan in your life." They echoed like a cold whisper through Carly's mind, haunting her long after he was gone. But at that moment, her heart was too clouded by longing and illusion to hear the voice of reason. To Carly, Brennan was more than a romantic escape. He was a symbol of hope, an escape from loneliness, a promise that she could still be desired, still be loved, after all she had endured. She clung to that promise with everything she had, not realizing she was gambling with her safety, her sanity, and her freedom. Brennan entered her life during a vulnerable chapter, slipping into the cracks left behind by past betrayals and loss. He was charming, mysterious, and dangerously polished. He said all the right things, made her feel seen, and touched the parts of her that ached to be acknowledged. Carly wanted to believe in him. She needed to. But what she didn't see, or refused to see, was the darkness beneath the surface. Brennan wasn't a man who gave love. He was a man who used it, weaponized it. In his world of secrets, lies, and power plays, Carly was never a partner. She was a pawn. Every soft whisper, every romantic gesture was calculated. And while Carly surrendered to his embrace, she had no idea he was connected to the very scheme that nearly cost her life, the polonium poisoning that landed her in the hospital, a result of a tainted bottle of champagne that had been meant for someone else. Or perhaps not. Jason knew. He had seen the warning signs, had pieced together Brennan's web of deceit. He tried, again and again, to pull Carly out. But she resisted. She didn't want to be saved. Not by Jason. Not again. She had spent so many years needing him, depending on him, and now she wanted to prove she could stand on her own, even if it meant standing beside the wrong man. Jason's concern was brushed off as jealousy, his devotion mistaken for control. Carly believed she could manage Brennan, that she was still in control. But she wasn't. As the weeks passed, Brennan began to change. The mask of the charming gentleman slipped, revealing flashes of coldness, of manipulation. He became more secretive, more dismissive, and more possessive. He isolated Carly from her family, from her friends, even from Jocelyn, who had started to question Brennan's intentions. Carly tried to silence those doubts, to convince herself it was just stress, just politics, just a misunderstanding. But deep down, fear was growing slowly, steadily. Jason's absence became more noticeable. She missed his calm, his strength, his quiet loyalty. She found herself replaying his last words, over and over, "You'll regret keeping Brennan in your life." And slowly, painfully, she began to understand. The moment of realization came not in a dramatic confrontation, but in a quiet, soul-crushing night. Carly sat alone in Brennan's empty home, her phone silent, her reflection in the mirror unfamiliar. She no longer recognized the woman staring back at her. The fire was gone. The fight was gone. In its place was regret, heavy and suffocating. When the truth finally unraveled, Brennan's ties to WSB, his knowledge of Jocelyn's assignment, his manipulations, and his silence about Cyrus Renaud, Carly's world shattered. She wasn't just heartbroken. She was betrayed, used, and left exposed to dangers she could no longer comprehend. And by then, it was too late. Jason had walked away. And this time, he wasn't coming back. Carly was left with nothing but her choices, her silence, and the 7 words that now rang louder than ever, "You'll regret keeping Brennan in your life." She did. With every breath, with every tear, and with a heart that would never be the same again. Step by step, Brennan pulled Carly deeper into a web of deceit and manipulation, so intricately woven that she didn't realize she was trapped until it was far too late. Every tender word, every romantic gesture, Every carefully timed moment of affection was merely a mask, a carefully constructed facade meant to distract her from the truth lurking beneath the surface. Brennan didn't love her. He was never capable of it. He was an expert in seduction and control, a master of exploiting vulnerability and turning trust into a weapon. And Carly, desperate for love and stability, fell straight into his trap. Even after the horrifying incident with the polonium poisoning, an attack that nearly took her life, Carly clung to the belief that it had all been a tragic mistake. She convinced herself that Brennan wasn't involved, that he couldn't have known. Her heart refused to believe that the man who had whispered promises in the dark could have played any role in something so cruel. But the truth was much darker. Brennan wasn't just a charming diplomat wrapped in mystery. He was a puppet of a powerful and dangerous underground network. He was the kind of man who could kiss her tenderly under candlelight at night, and then give the order to eliminate someone the next morning without blinking. As days turned into weeks, Carly began to feel the subtle tightening of the invisible chains Brennan had fastened around her. What once felt like affection began to feel like surveillance. Her phone calls were monitored. Her conversations with friends and family grew more strained. Jocelyn, Michael, even Sunny, everyone who once formed her emotional safety net, began to drift further away as Brennan isolated her under the guise of protection. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't lock any doors, but he built a prison all the same. It was psychological, suffocating, and ever-present. Carly no longer felt free. She felt watched, managed, controlled. What was most terrifying wasn't just that Brennan controlled her world, it was that he began to control her thoughts. She started questioning her instincts. She second-guessed every concern. Every time she caught him in a lie, he'd offer just enough of the truth to confuse her and make her feel guilty for doubting him. He eroded her self-trust with subtle precision. Carly, once a fiercely independent and sharp-minded woman, began to shrink inside herself. She told herself she was being paranoid, that the love she felt couldn't be fake, that the danger Jason warned her about wasn't real. But deep down, in the stillness of night, Carly knew something was wrong. She felt it in the pit of her stomach, in the way Brennan looked at her with cold calculation masked as desire, in the way he always seemed to know more than he admitted, in the way he silenced her with kisses when she asked too many questions. The house they shared became a gilded cage. Her voice, once loud and full of conviction, became quieter. Her laughter faded. Her light dimmed. She was living in a nightmare she refused to wake from because to do so would mean admitting that she had made a devastating mistake. Jason had been right all along. Brennan didn't see Carly as a partner or a lover. She was a tool, something to be used, managed, and discarded when necessary. Her presence in his life had nothing to do with love and everything to do with strategy. She was valuable because of her connections, her influence, and her emotional vulnerability. And Jason, who had stood by helplessly as Carly fell deeper into Brennan's orbit, had seen the truth long before she did. But by the time Carly finally opened her eyes, it was too late. The walls had closed in. Brennan's lies had become her reality, and her isolation was complete. She realized she wasn't being loved, she was being used. And worse, she had allowed it, ignored every warning, and turned her back on the only person who ever truly had her best interest at heart. She was no longer a woman in love. She was a prisoner in disguise. And Jason's final words echoed louder than ever in the silence Brennan left behind. The deeper Carly fell into the illusion of her relationship with Brennan, the more she lost pieces of herself, her independence, her judgment, her voice. Slowly but surely, the vibrant, determined woman who once stood strong in the face of countless battles began to disappear beneath a veil of confusion and emotional dependence. Brennan didn't just manipulate her choices, he eroded her sense of reality. What began as subtle control soon became suffocating dominance. He dictated the terms of her days, intercepted her conversations, and rewrote her truth, until Carly could no longer distinguish between her own thoughts and the version of reality Brennan crafted for her. The most painful part wasn't Brennan's control, it was the silence that grew between Carly and the people she loved. Those who once stood by her through every storm began to drift away, unsure of how to reach her or even who she was becoming. Her closest friends, her confidants, her support system all seemed to grow quiet. And most devastating of all was the change in Jocelyn. Carly's daughter, her pride, her strength, Jocelyn had always been a reflection of her fiercest qualities. But now, even Jocelyn began to question her mother's choices. She asked questions Carly couldn't answer. She looked at her with a mix of fear, disappointment, and worry. Carly tried to reassure her, to downplay the dangers, but Jocelyn was no longer a little girl who could be comforted with a hug and a lie. She was a woman in her own right, smart, observant, and unafraid to speak the truth. And then came the moment that shattered Carly completely. She learned, by accident, that Brennan had known for weeks about Jocelyn's new assignment with the WSB. He had kept it from her. He had stood beside her, smiled at her, kissed her, all while hiding the truth about her daughter's safety. That betrayal broke something deep inside Carly. It wasn't just a secret, it was a violation of the one sacred thing she had left, her role as a mother. She had allowed Brennan into her life, into her home, into her heart, and in return, he had endangered the person she loved most without so much as a word. Suddenly, the carefully constructed world Brennan had built around her began to crack. The love she thought she had was revealed to be a lie. The trust she had placed in him was nothing more than a calculated trap. And with that realization came the gut-wrenching loneliness. Jason, the one person who had always known her better than anyone, had vanished after his final warning. She had ignored him, dismissed him, pushed him away. And now he was gone, silent, unreachable. One night, in the darkest hours before dawn, Carly collapsed to the floor of her bedroom, overcome by everything she had tried so hard to deny. Her sobs were raw and jagged, her chest heaving with regret as the weight of her choices pressed down on her like a crushing tide. Her hand, trembling and desperate, reached for her phone, a final, foolish hope that Jason had left her a message, a sign, anything. But the screen remained dark. No new messages. No missed calls. Just silence. Carly stared at that silence like it was a sentence she had written for herself. She had chosen Brennan. She had defended him, loved him, believed in him. And now she was alone, betrayed, and shattered, reduced to nothing more than a woman who had gambled with everything and lost. And in the stillness, Jason's last words returned to her like a whisper etched into her soul. "You'll regret keeping Brennan in your life." She did. With every heartbeat, with every tear, with every empty breath. She was no longer the fierce, unshakable Carly the world once knew. The woman who had stood tall through heartbreak, betrayal, and unimaginable loss had slowly crumbled under the weight of her own denial. Piece by piece, the strength that had once defined her eroded into silence, confusion, and despair. The fire in her eyes, the one that had once dared anyone to challenge her, was gone. All that remained was a broken woman, paralyzed by regret and quietly begging for redemption. In the stillness of her isolation, Carly found herself reaching out in desperation, not with words, but with every beat of her aching heart, for Jason. The man who had always been there. The one who had protected her without conditions, who had warned her not out of jealousy, but out of love. The one she had cast aside when she needed him the most. Now, in the aftermath of everything, all she wanted was for him to come back. To hold her. To save her. To make it all stop. But Jason was gone. And she knew, deep down, he would not return simply because she called. Not this time. She had made her choice and Jason had honored it by walking away. In her mind, his final warning, the 7 words he left her with, had become more than a memory. They were a scar, carved into the very fabric of her soul. "You'll regret keeping Brennan in your life." They echoed in every moment of silence, in every shiver of fear, in every breath she took alone in the house that once felt like refuge, but now felt like a cage. It was a prophecy that had come true in the cruelest way possible. Brennan, the man who had once made her heart race, who had whispered promises in the dark and held her like she was something precious, had revealed his true form. He was no savior. He was no partner. He was a ghost, haunting her every moment, casting a shadow over every part of her life. A predator cloaked in charm. A threat disguised as desire. With every passing day, the illusion he had built unraveled, exposing the danger she had invited into her heart and into her home. And now, Carly lived in that reality. Each morning, she woke up with a hollow ache in her chest, knowing she had lost more than just love. She had lost her identity, her confidence, her trust in herself. She lived in fear, in regret, in the suffocating knowledge that the one person who could have pulled her out of this darkness had given her a chance, and she hadn't taken it. She didn't just want Jason to return. She needed him. She needed his steady presence, his unwavering strength, the silent understanding they had always shared. But she also knew that needing him now was not enough. Because redemption, once delayed too long, becomes unreachable. Carly understood this now, perhaps more deeply than she had ever understood anything. She had walked willingly into her own destruction, and by the time she realized it, the bridge back had already burned behind her. And so, she sat alone, wrapped in the quiet torment of hindsight, clutching her regret like a lifeline, knowing that this time, forgiveness might never come. This time, she had broken not only her heart, but Jason's too. And the chance to be saved may already be gone forever.